What if everything you've been taught about human history is a carefully constructed lie? What if the greatest cover-up in human civilization isn't hidden in classified documents or secret vaults, but standing in plain sight, towering over us in the architecture we walk past every day? From childhood, we're conditioned to accept a simple, linear narrative of human development. We crawled out of caves, learned to farm, built cities, and slowly progressed to where we are today. A neat story. A comfortable story. But what if the evidence, scattered across every continent, tells us something completely different? What if humanity isn't climbing upward from primitive origins, but desperately trying to rebuild what was lost? The question isn't whether giants existed. The evidence for that is overwhelming and undeniable. The real question, the one that should terrify you, is why their existence has been so systematically erased from our collective memory. Who benefited from hiding this? Truth. And what else are they hiding? Our investigation begins not in dusty archives or ancient texts, but in the most ordinary places. Walk into any museum. Look at the objects behind the glass. Really look at them. You'll find books so massive that no human could hold them open to read. Musical instruments designed for hands twice the size of ours. Swords that would drag on the ground if a normal person tried to wield them. Armour that would swallow a modern soldier whole. The official explanations are laughable. Ceremonial objects, they tell us. Decorative pieces never meant for actual use. But why would any civilization invest such enormous resources into creating non-functional replicas? Why forge a sword from precious metal, perfectly balanced and battle-worn, just to hang on a wall? The logic doesn't hold. Consider the famous papal rings preserved in the Vatican. These aren't slightly oversized jewellery pieces. A modern coin passes through them with room to spare. Were the 8 popes of history truly wearing rings sized for fingers 3 times the thickness of a normal human hand? And if so, what does that tell us about who really occupied those positions of power? The architecture screams the truth even louder. Stand in front of any building constructed before the Industrial Revolution. The doors reach heights of 4, 5, even 6 metres. The handles are positioned so high that an average person must reach up awkwardly to grasp them. Inside, the ceilings soar to heights that make heating impossible. That waste space in ways that contradict every principle of practical construction. We're told this is about grandeur, about inspiring awe. But that explanation falls apart the moment you actually try to live in these spaces. They're not just impractical for humans. They're perfectly proportioned for being significantly larger than us. Every detail, from the width of the staircases to the height of the windows, tells the same story. These buildings weren't made for us. The most revealing evidence comes from the modifications. Look closely at the grand staircases of Europe's oldest structures. You'll see something strange. The original steps, massive and towering, have been crudely subdivided. Smaller steps have been wedged in between, sometimes at awkward angles, clearly added long after the initial construction. Why? Because the original stairs were impossible for normal humans to climb comfortably. We inherited these buildings and had to adapt them, like children trying to wear their father's clothes. Then there's the undeniable testimony of language itself. We still use phrases like "Your Highness" and "Your Highborn" without thinking about what they originally meant. These weren't just metaphors for social status. They were literal descriptions of physical stature. The rulers, the nobility, the priest class, they weren't just socially elevated, they were actually physically taller, much taller. Historical chronicles confirm this, in ways that make modern historians deeply uncomfortable. Reports from the 16th century describe skeletons discovered in Switzerland measuring nearly 6 metres in length. French records mention remains of 7-metre individuals. There are documented finds of bones belonging to beings that reached almost 11 metres in height. These aren't isolated accounts. They're part of a massive body of evidence that suddenly stops appearing in official records around the late 19th century. What happened? Did giants suddenly stop dying? Or did someone decide their remains were too inconvenient to acknowledge? The cover-up wasn't subtle. It was systematic and global. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, a curious pattern emerges. Whenever giant remains were discovered, they would be shipped to major museums, particularly the Smithsonian Institution in America. And then, mysteriously, they would vanish. Not misplaced, not lost to fire or flood, simply erased from the records as if they never existed. Archaeologists who insisted on publicising their finds would have their funding cut, their reputations destroyed, their discoveries dismissed as hoaxes. The message was clear: some truths are not meant to be known. But why? What possible reason could justify such an elaborate deception? The answer lies in understanding what the existence of giants truly means for our conception of history. If giants existed, and all evidence suggests they did, then they weren't primitive. They were the builders of the impossible structures we attribute to ancient civilizations. They created the megalithic complexes we can't replicate today, even with modern technology. They erected the temples, the pyramids, the massive stone structures that dot every continent. This realization demolishes the comfortable narrative of human progress. We're not the pinnacle of development. We're the survivors of a collapse, living in the ruins of a far more advanced civilization. Every grand building in every historic city centre wasn't built by our ancestors using primitive tools. It was inherited. We moved into homes abandoned by their original occupants. The implications terrify those in power. If humanity understands it once lived under the rule, or alongside a race of giants, if people realise the magnificent architecture surrounding them was created by beings we can't match, the entire foundation of modern authority crumbles. How can our leaders claim legitimacy when the very palaces they occupy were built by others? How can they promise progress when we're clearly living in a state of regression? So they chose to rewrite history. They attributed the works of giants to primitive humans using nothing but ropes and copper tools. They created a mythology of gradual developments, of slow progress from simple to complex. They taught us to marvel at how clever ancient humans were, never mentioning that ancient humans didn't build these structures at all. The lies compound. We're shown images of construction from the 19th century, photographs of men in period clothing standing on scaffolding beside grand buildings. Look at these images carefully. The buildings are always already standing. The men are painting, plastering, making repairs. But you never see the actual construction. You never see the foundations being laid, the massive stones being lifted into place, the framework being erected. Because they're not building, they're restoring. They're moving into structures that already existed. The famous World's Fairs provide the perfect example of this deception. Entire cities of magnificent buildings would allegedly be constructed in months, made from plaster and wood, only to be demolished immediately after the exhibitions ended. The official story is absurd on its face. The photographs show structures of incredible complexity and permanence. These weren't temporary pavilions. They were existing cities of the previous civilization, cleaned up and repurposed for display, then destroyed to hide the evidence. But evidence of the giant's existence couldn't be completely erased. It's embedded too deeply in the physical world. The architectural proportions remain unchanged. The massive artifacts sit in museums, even if their true purpose is disguised. And the most obvious evidence of all continues to stare us in the face every time we walk down an old city street. Look at the ground floors of any historic building. The windows are buried halfway or entirely in the earth. Doors lead into solid walls of soil. We're told this is the cultural layer, the natural accumulation of dirt over centuries. But this explanation defies basic logic. 5 meters of accumulated grime in just a few centuries, in cities with regular street cleaning, while the buildings themselves remain pristine? The truth is simpler and more terrifying. These cities were buried. A global catastrophe, possibly multiple catastrophes, covered the world in meters of mud and debris. The evidence suggests these weren't slow geological processes. They were rapid, violent events that entombed entire civilizations almost overnight. This is the mud flood spoken of in alternative histories, the cataclysm that official science refuses to acknowledge. The lower floors of buildings didn't sink into the earth. The earth rose up and consumed them. And with those lower floors went all the infrastructure, all the technology, all the systems that made these cities function. Imagine a building with all its utilities, its water systems, its heating, its power generation, located in the basement levels as they should be. Now imagine those levels suddenly buried under 5 meters of compacted clay. The survivors or new inhabitants occupy the upper floors, but they have lost access to everything that made the building work. They have light, but no understanding of how to maintain it. They have grand halls, but no way to heat them. They have elaborate water, systems for fountains, but can't figure out how to route a simple drain for a toilet. This explains the bizarre paradox that historians gloss over. The palaces of Europe boast incredible hydraulic engineering in their fountain systems, yet the inhabitants supposedly lived in filth, using chamber pots and relieving themselves in hallways. Not because they didn't know better, because they inherited buildings whose sanitation systems were buried and inaccessible, and they lacked the knowledge to recreate them. We are the inheritors of a lost world, living in homes built for others, using tools we don't understand, surrounded by artifacts we attribute to the wrong creators. And the greatest tragedy is that most of humanity doesn't even realise it. The demographic evidence reveals another disturbing truth. The 19th century saw the sudden appearance of millions of orphans worldwide. Foundling homes and orphanages sprung up everywhere, designed to house tens of thousands of children who seemingly had no parents. Official history offers vague explanations about wars and disease, but the scale doesn't match. This was a global phenomenon, coordinated and systematic. What if these orphans were the first generation of a reset civilization? What if, after the cataclysm that buried the cities and eliminated the giants, a new population was introduced? Given simple names, simple histories, and sent to inhabit the empty structures left behind. This would explain why genealogical research for most people hits a wall in the mid-1800s. Why we can trace our families back 3 or 4 generations and then find nothing. Not because the records were lost, because there are no records, because that's when the current iteration of humanity began. The giants themselves faced extinction not through war, but through physics. When the global catastrophe struck, it changed more than just the landscape. It altered the atmosphere itself. Ancient texts and geological evidence suggest the Earth once had a vapor canopy, a dense layer of water vapor in the upper atmosphere that created uniform pressure and temperature across the entire planet. The collapse of this canopy had 2 catastrophic effects. First, it released biblical floods as the vapor condensed and fell as rain. Second, and more devastating for the giants, it drastically reduced atmospheric pressure. Their biology had evolved in a high-pressure environment. Their massive frames, their cardiovascular systems, everything about their physiology was optimized for conditions we can barely imagine. When the pressure dropped, they couldn't adapt. Moving became difficult. Their hearts struggled to pump blood against gravity through their enormous bodies. Within a generation or two, they began to die out. The few who survived were crippled, requiring canes and crutches just to stand, their bodies betraying them in an environment that had become hostile. We see them in old photographs from the 19th century. Unusually tall individuals, always with walking aids, always appearing uncomfortable, always dying young. These were the last of the giants, the final remnants of a race that once ruled the world, reduced to circus attractions and medical curiosities before vanishing entirely. Their disappearance was convenient for those who wanted to reshape human civilization according to a new vision. Without the giants to challenge the narrative, history could be rewritten completely. The magnificent cities could be claimed as human achievements. The impossible engineering could be attributed to clever primitives. And anyone who questioned the official story could be dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. But the truth has a way of resurfacing. Every buried window frame, every oversized doorway, every artifact too large for human use is a crack in the facade. The evidence accumulates until it becomes impossible to ignore. And once you see it, once you understand what you're really looking at, you can't unsee it. The world around you transforms. That historic building downtown isn't a testament to human ingenuity. It's a hand-me-down from beings far more capable than us. That museum artifact isn't a ceremonial piece. It's a functional tool for hands larger than yours. That ancient text describing giants isn't mythology. It's history, recorded by witnesses and then deliberately obscured by those who came after. The question now is what we do with this knowledge. Do we continue to accept the comfortable lies? Do we keep pretending that primitive humans with copper chisels carved out mountain fortresses? That they transported 100-ton stones across continents using nothing but ropes and wooden rollers? That they calculated the mathematics of structures modern engineers struggle to replicate? Or do we demand the truth? Do we insist on answers about where all those giant remains disappeared to? Do we question why so many historical records conveniently burned in the 19th century? Do we investigate why the lower floors of our cities are buried? The giants existed. This is not speculation. It's facts, supported by physical evidence, historical records, and the basic logic of engineering. They built the world we inherited. They created wonders we can't match. And then they died, or were destroyed in a cataclysm that reset human civilization. We are the children of that reset, raised in ignorance, fed comfortable lies, convinced that we represent progress when we're actually living in decline. The sooner we accept this truth, the sooner we can begin asking the right questions. Not just about the past, but about who controls the present, and what other truths they're hiding. The forbidden truth about giants isn't just that they existed. It's that admitting they existed demolishes every pillar of modern historical narrative. It reveals that progress is a myth, that we're not climbing toward enlightenment, but struggling to remember what was lost, that the authorities who claim to guide us are themselves operating in ignorance, or worse, in deliberate deception. Look around you with new eyes. See the world as it truly is. A magnificent inheritance from beings we've been taught never existed. And understand that the same forces that erased the giants from history have shaped every other aspect of your worldview. They control what you know because knowledge is power. And the knowledge of humanity's true past, of the giants who came before, of the advanced civilization that preceded our own is the most dangerous knowledge of all. The stones remember, even if we've been forced to forget. And now that you know what to look for, you'll see their testimony everywhere. The only question remaining is whether you have the courage to accept what they're telling you.